I will come to you to talk about the European Landscape Convention and how can it foster maybe heritage communities. Um, so from my talk, the idea I will have 5 chapters, let's say. First, the European Landscape Convention, just as a short reminder, so to get into the theme, the perception, which is very important in this concept of the convention. Then I will give you some examples from one of our projects, Sisterscapes, how to link landscape and cultural heritage. And in the end, I will touch 2 things. One is the plague, cholera, or corona, so maybe to reflect on our actual situation, and the European Green Deal. So let's start with the European Landscape Convention, which is a framework of action, and it's a Council of Europe convention. So often people misunderstood it could be something from the European Union. It's an agreement between countries which have to sign the convention so that it comes into force. The convention started the signature process 2000 and came into force 2004 when 10 countries have already signed it. Today, it's one of the most signed conventions of the Council of Europe. 40 member states of the Council of Europe have signed the convention and 39 have ratified it. Among these 40 signatory states, sometimes the question is how many EU countries. So from the 27 EU countries we have in the moment, 25 have signed it and 1 has not ratified. Ratified means they put it into the national law, so it is ratified by the parliament and then it has a legal binding situation. So the anniversary will be on the 20th of October 2020 this year, and we will look back on this occasion what we have achieved in between. Just some basic remarks on the European Landscape Convention. First of all, it affects the whole territory of a signatory country, and the whole territory means also coastal areas, the sea, huge lakes are included to that. So sometimes it's misunderstood that it is just the inland. So it's really the whole territory affected by it, and it's not on heritage sites or certain sites. So it takes effect on everything. Main issue on the European Landscape Convention are landscape planning, so the planning of the territory, the management of it, and the protection. And the idea is that the signatory countries agree to have a landscape policy on national level. The implementation is a complete national question, and it follows, of course, the culture of planning and management of the territory. That includes also the involvement of people, participatory processes. So we have sometimes quite differences between the different countries following their own tradition and legal setting. The main 3 things, and that I think most of you will know also from the culture, from the heritage work, is awareness rising, in this case for landscape, and landscapes change. So landscape is changing permanently. Then the landscape character assessment, where each country tries to assess a certain character of a landscape, and what they call landscape quality objectives. So if you have a landscape, so you define in a participatory process quality objectives you want to reach or you want to keep in managing and planning this landscape. Which leads to the question, what is landscape in the end? So landscape is, of course, the physical landscape, but as the convention said, landscape is defined by the perception of people. So it's not only the physical representation of our surrounding, it is the perception of the people. So I will skip that because I know we have not much time on it. So who is interested in Civilscape can ask me on it, of course. The the key to landscape is perception. Why? And what are the implications from that? So, because the landscape also in this setting on planning and management and protection laws is dependent on the perception of the people. So a good thing is to think about what does it mean, perception. So in most cases, people thinking on landscape will look on a landscape. So they first see the view, but perception depends on all senses. So that is, I think, something common for you in heritage interpretation. So we also take other senses than the visual sense in account when we have a perception. And what is interesting when you think about this perception, so what we see practically when you look how our eyes are constructed, we look on the landscape like through a keyhole. So it's very sharp. Maybe some of you have this postcard inviting to this event. If you look on this postcard, hold it in front of you, just a meter away. This is the size you are really seeing sharp in 3D. Everything else is an interpolation, what you have seen before or what you expect to see. And that means the perception as such is a construction of the brain. That means also it is influenced what we're expecting to see or what draws our attention might be more prominent in this perception. And that has another implication, which is important, that the perception of landscape is not per se common. So you can't expect that everyone sees it in the same way. Of course, we have some learning effects which ensure that we see similar landscapes in the end, but it's not per se common. So it means when we talk about this perception and that landscape is defined by it, we have to think about what is it in the end. And landscape from the convention is a social construction. That means the perception of many people in a dialogue, yeah, they construct this landscape. And when we try to use it in planning and management, so to take into account different interests, different functionality, different expectation, then it's important that we are clear. We need a dialogue in the community, which is with their perception defining the landscape, and that is essential. And this needs interaction and interpretation. So how can we connect landscapes and cultural heritage? So we have actually we have a project. Of course, we have some projects, but one of the projects is about the Sisterscapes, and the Sisterscapes deal with cultural heritage landscapes of monasteries. So the Cistercians have been an order founded in the 12th century, and over nearly 800 years, they have founded and maintained and operated abbeys monastery across Europe. So it was a big movement, Reformation movement, and the interesting thing of this Cistercian order was it had a very big impact on landscape development, and not only on their time, so 12th, 13th, 14th century, depending when they arrived in the region, but also today. You can see the traces of this, how they have formed the landscape, which is still there, is still in function, partly, is still using it in a way they have, in a way, planned over centuries ago. It's a quite interesting thing. It has a lot of interesting aspects. So the Cistercian, they used knowledge management in a very, very modern way to exchange between the monastery experience, how to improve the land use, how to build monastery sites. And it's quite interesting to see that you can see today in the documents, you can see the blueprints, you can see letters telling the brothers, the colleagues in another monastery, how to make use of a new sort of grain, or how to become more influential in trading out the farming products. So the Sisterscapes projects includes 16 heritage landscapes from 8 countries. We have 16 main partner in the project, and we do actually a landscape character assessment. That means we look what are the characteristics of the certain landscape, monastery landscape, what are the elements in it, how can we preserve them, how can we manage them over the time, but also we start looking how to have a landscape interpretation. And in the end, of course, it's a heritage interpretation. It's not only cultural heritage, part of these landscapes include also natural heritage, of course. And the idea is that over the project, these 16 sites will develop an integrated cultural heritage management, because the aim of the project is to receive the European Heritage label. We hope to be successful within 4 years. It's a little bit ambitious, but let's see. And there's also an initiative of a European thematic network in this context, because municipalities often have inherited these sites, or small sites, or part of sites, and now struggling how to manage it and how to have a good interpretation, a good awareness rising among the population about these heritage values. So what I want to do quite shortly is to give you an idea how this religion and landscape is related, because it was often one of the question, how is cultural heritage and landscape related? So if you look on this example, the Cologne Cathedral, well, it's one of these big Gothic cathedrals standing in the middle of a town. What you can't see, it was originally put on a hill overviewing Cologne. Today it's a little bit different, but it is one it's an important building. So the whole city is more or less constructed around. You see on the right side the railway bridge, one of the first biggest railway bridges that was built 1851, and it was oriented towards a cathedral. So something a planet today wouldn't do. Yeah, just go with a bridge towards the cathedral and then have a sharp curve around to reach the central station in Cologne. Of course, the building as such is also related to the surrounding landscapes. So where the stone has been cutted. When we go a little bit upstream, the River Rhine, this is the place where the original stone was cut at end of the 12th century. They start building the Cologne Cathedral, and they start cutting the stone here. With the Reformation, the building process stopped, so it was pausing. And then in the 1840s, so in the 19th century, they decide to continue building the cathedral and to finish it. So it was finished 1851. What was one of the outcome was that they calculate that they will need this mountainside for the stones. And immediately people from Bonn, which is located on the other side of this region across the River Rhine, people start protesting. So the effect was, this is one of the first protected sites in Germany, because people wouldn't like to see their landscape taken away for a cathedral just downstream. In this landscape, there are some remains of a also big church. Today, it's a ruin, but this church is just located 10 kilometers away. It's a monastery church. It's one of the Cistercians monastery church. And before the cathedral in Cologne was finished, this was the biggest church in the area. And the Cistercians had a lot of effects on land use in this site. One thing is inner colonization. So a lot of villages around have been founded or rebuilt by the monastery, so that they use it, what they call Grangier, as a farmers, and they add value to the monastery. So they were taxed, of course, they were owned by the monastery partly, but they systematically changed the land use and made it more effectful, which made them in the end one of the big economic drivers in the 14th, 15th, even 16th century. And of course, that has influenced the building culture in this area. So you have functional buildings which are partly still standing. They of course changed the use over the time. This one is a conference center in the former monastery site. It's also interesting to look how the architecture is influenced on the land use in the surrounding. But of course, it has an effect on the farm production itself. So when we talk today from farm to fork, one of the European projects, a lot of is from the origin from this time, and we can trace it back to the history, and we can show that we still use these historic concepts. Other things I will not go to details, like beer and spices, medicine, was produced by the monastery in gardens, and so another aspect was fish, because of the strict regulation on meat. When it comes to this religious belief, there was a huge demand on fish. So in some areas, normally each of these abbeys, monastery, had one or normally three ponds, and some of the monasteries are surrounded by huge landscape with fish ponds. So like in today Czech Republic, for example, we have monasteries like this, and they were an important actor on the fish market in Europe. So they trade the fish across the country. Yeah. If you look on this remains, of course, to understand that, it needs some knowledge about what has happened there, how it has developed, what is the context of all of that. This is something, of course, you know from your from heritage interpretation, and I think it's crucial, yeah, that people understand the value of what they have there, but also sometimes how they can learn lessons from the heritage, what has happened in the past, and how can this be used in the co-creation of our future. And that brings me quite shortly, because on this point, plague, cholera, and corona, so reflect to change. It is interesting to see that when you look on the monasteries and the monastery landscapes, you can, of course, see how the landscape changed because of the plague. So people were dying, so the population went down. So land use was shrinking. After a while, it starts again. Um, so all this reaction, but also, for example, when they in monastery, they of course they realized that people get ill if they are packed in small houses, so that they changed the architecture of the monasteries. They start thinking about that people uh, have to have access to the gardens or to parks, so to in these difficult times of plague, yeah, to have something where they can enjoy, simply enjoy. And I think when you look on this, all of this, it is also something that gives us lessons for our Corona times. So today, of course, we're facing similarities. What is new for us is that with Corona, we have a plague, an illness that we can't, where we have no medicine or vaccination for. Think about that these people in the development, in this historic time, face this permanently. Yeah, there was no medicine for cholera until end of the 19th century. And of course, that has influenced how people worked on landscape, how they trying to have a sustainable landscape of their time. And I think this Corona is a good situation where we not only look on our heritage, and make an interpretation on that, but also start thinking about what kind of lessons we are learning from what have happened in history and what could be used for our future. So how can we do maybe things differently? So in the Corona times, the EU Commission has announced end of last year, the European Green Deal. So how to work as a action program, how to work on the challenges of our time. Corona was not really on their screen at that time, so they focused on climatic change, climatic adaptation, fossil-free industry, farm to fork, the challenge of biodiversity, all these big problems to solve. And it is interesting that still the Commission is pushing in this direction. We think, as Civilscape, we think it's good because we have to solve that. But I think it's also important to learn the lessons. And learning the lessons, what Peter said in the introduction, what you discussed yesterday, how important it is to bring people together, so to have a common understanding of heritage. It's the same way it needs a common understanding of the landscape, because we will make use of this landscape. We will do plannings, we will do management on landscapes to find solutions on these urgent problems, and to think about how we can do this in a sustainable way. Yeah. Regarding the Green Deal, to make it short, we have started with a letter to the Commission, lessons to learn, the co-creation and engagement is needed. I think that is also something where heritage interpretation can play really an important role in the starting debate. We will see this debate over the next 6 to 7 years, with the start of the action program, which of course will go for a longer time. But it's essential that people come together and have a joint common understanding in the end. Short advertising about the question of Green Deal. We will have some conferences in the next months. Hopefully, it will be face-to-face conference. Otherwise, we will try to learn from Interpret Europe with the online conference, or maybe we will make a mixture. You have the presentation. You can ask me about the events, and these events are part of the German EU presidency program. So thank you very much. I hope I left some time for questions.